The house on Maple Street was full of light and laughter. Balloons floated near the ceiling. A banner read, "Happy 25th birthday, James." Music played softly in the background. Friends and neighbors gathered around a long table filled with food. James stood in the middle of it all, smiling, holding a glass of juice. He was tall, kind-eyed, and easy to like. Everyone said he had his father's stubbornness and his mother's warm heart, but James didn't feel like celebrating tonight. Something inside him felt strange. He couldn't explain it. It was like a small voice whispering that something was missing. He looked around the room. His parents, Robert and Margaret, sat near the window. They were older than most parents of a 25-year-old. Robert was 71. Margaret was 68. James had grown up hearing the same story his whole life. "You were our little miracle. We never expected to have a child so late in life." He had always believed it. Why wouldn't he? But lately, small things bothered him. The way his mother sometimes looked at him with sadness instead of joy. The way his father changed the subject whenever James asked about his birth. The missing photos from his baby years. No hospital pictures. No nursery photos. Nothing from his first few months of life. James pushed the thought away. Tonight was supposed to be happy. Outside, across the quiet street, a car was parked in the shadows. A woman sat inside, watching the house through the window. She had light brown hair streaked with gray, tired eyes, and hands that trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Her name was Emily. She had been driving past this house every year on this exact date for a long time. She never went inside. She never even walked up to the door. She only watched from a distance, like a stranger looking into a life that once belonged to her. Tonight, something was different. She couldn't stop herself. She stepped out of the car. The cool evening air hit her face as she walked closer, staying near the edge of the yard where the shadows were thick. Through the window, she could see him clearly for the first time in years. James thought he had grown into a man. Broad shoulders, confident smile. A face that still carried traces of the tiny baby she once held for only a few hours 25 years ago. Her eyes filled with tears. She remembered that day like it was yesterday. The cold hospital room. The judgment in her father's eyes. The paper they placed in front of her, telling her it was the only way to protect the family. She remembered signing her name with a shaking hand. Tears falling onto the ink before it even dried. She remembered being told the baby would go to a loving family far away, where no one would ever know the truth. She never imagined that loving family would be her own parents. Emily wiped her eyes and stepped even closer to the window. Inside, James laughed at something one of his friends said. The sound of his laughter reached her, soft and warm, carried by the night air. She wanted so badly to walk inside, to hug him, to tell him the truth. To say the words she had held inside her chest for 25 long years, but she couldn't, not tonight. Not yet. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, cold and firm. If you ever tell him the truth, you will destroy this family. You will destroy him. She had believed those words for so long that they became a cage around her heart. A car passed on the street, and Emily quickly stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. She couldn't risk being seen. Not by Margaret, not by Robert, and especially not by James. She stood there for a long moment, watching the warm glow of the party through the window, feeling like an outsider looking into her own life. Finally, she whispered, so quietly that only the night could hear her, "Happy birthday, my son." Then she turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Inside the house, James suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He turned toward the window, as if sensing something, but there was nothing there. Just the dark street and the quiet night. "You okay, honey?" Margaret asked, walking up beside him with a soft smile. But her eyes looked worried, almost fearful, as if she too had felt something. "Yeah," James said slowly. "I just felt like someone was watching me." Margaret's smile faded for a brief second before she forced it back. "It's probably just the excitement of turning 25, she said quickly. Big birthdays make people feel strange things. James nodded, but the feeling didn't go away. It sat heavy in his chest, like a warning he couldn't understand. Later that night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, James sat alone in his room. He pulled out an old shoebox from his closet, one his mother had given him years ago, filled with a few childhood items. A worn baby blanket, a small toy, a single photograph of him as an infant held by his mother. But strangely, the photo looked different from what he remembered. The hospital band on the tiny wrist in the picture had a name printed on it that wasn't his. James squinted at the faded letters. He couldn't quite make them out, but something about it made his stomach tighten. He placed the photo down slowly, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in his life, James asked himself a question he never thought he would need to ask. Who am I really? Outside, unseen by anyone, Emily's car disappeared into the night, carrying a secret that had waited 25 years to be told, a secret that was about to change everything. 25 years ago, the Miller house was not filled with laughter. It was filled with fear. Emily was 19 years old, sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands pressed against her swollen belly. Outside her door, she could hear her parents arguing in sharp, angry whispers. She already knew what they were deciding. They were deciding her future without asking her a single question. The door opened. Her father, Harold, stepped in first. His face was hard, his jaw tight. Behind him stood her mother, Margaret, eyes red from crying, but silent. "We've made a decision," Harold said, his voice cold and final. "This baby will not carry shame into this family." "He's not shame, Dad," Emily said, her voice breaking. "He's your grandson. He is a mistake," Harold snapped. "A mistake made by a boy who ran away the moment he found out you were pregnant. Do you understand what people will say? Do you understand what this will do to us?" Emily's tears fell freely now. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Just give him away." Harold placed a folder on the bed in front of her. "Adoption papers. You will sign these," he said. "The baby will go to a good family, somewhere far from here. No one will ever know." Emily looked at her mother, silently begging her to say something, anything, to stop this. But Margaret only lowered her eyes and stayed quiet. That silence hurt Emily more than her father's anger ever could. "Please," Emily whispered. "Don't make me do this. It's already done," Harold said. "Sign it." With trembling hands, Emily picked up the pen. Her vision blurred with tears as she pressed it to the paper. Each letter of her signature felt like it was tearing a piece of her heart away. She never knew, in that moment, that her own parents had already decided something else entirely, something even crueler than sending the baby away to strangers. Present day, Emily sat in her small apartment across town, staring at an old photograph of her father now lying in a hospital bed after a sudden heart attack. The nurse's voice on the phone earlier still echoed in her ears. "Your father's asking for you, Miss Miller. He says it's urgent." Emily hadn't spoken to Harold in years. Not really. Their conversations were short, cold, distant. But something in the nurse's voice told her this call was different. She drove to the hospital that night, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and hope. Maybe, after all these years, her father wanted to make things right. Maybe he wanted to finally tell the truth. When she walked into his hospital room, Harold looked smaller than she remembered, older, weaker. His skin was pale, and tubes ran from his arm to a machine beside the bed. "Emily," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "You came. You said it was urgent," Emily replied, standing near the door, unwilling to get too close. Harold's eyes shifted toward the window, avoiding her gaze. "There's something I need to tell you before it's too late." Emily's heart raced. Was this it? Was he finally going to admit what he did? I know you've been watching that boy, Harold said quietly. James, Emily froze. How do you know that? I've always known, Harold said. I had someone keep an eye on you over the years. I couldn't risk you doing something foolish. Anger flared inside Emily. Foolish? You mean like telling my own son the truth? Harold's face tightened. That boy is happy. He has a good life. If you tell him now, you will destroy everything. Margaret and Robert raised him as their own. Do you understand what would happen if the truth came out? Emily's hands clenched into fists. You didn't give my baby to strangers. You gave him to your own daughter and her husband. You made me sign papers, cry for months believing he was gone forever, while you let your other daughter raise him 10 minutes away from me. Harold's eyes finally met hers, cold and unshaken. It was the only way to keep this family together. Robert and Margaret couldn't have children. You were young and unmarried. It solved two problems at once. Emily felt sick. Two problems. He's not a problem, Dad. He's a human being. He's my son, and he still doesn't know that, Harold said sharply. And he never will. If you know what's good for this family. Tears streamed down Emily's face, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fury. I've stayed quiet for 25 years, she said, her voice shaking. I've watched him grow up from a distance. I've missed his first steps, his first words, his graduation, every birthday. And you're lying here, dying, still trying to control me. Harold's expression softened for just a moment, but only a moment. There's something else, he said. Something you don't know. Emily's breath caught. What? Harold hesitated, his eyes glancing toward the door as if making sure no one else was listening. The reason I pushed so hard for Robert and Margaret to raise him. It wasn't just about protecting the family's name. Then what was it? Harold's hand trembled as he reached for a small metal box on the table beside his bed. It was about protecting something much bigger, something tied to the inheritance, and to who James's father really is. Emily's whole body went cold. What do you mean? Who his father really is? I told you who his father is. Harold looked away, his silence heavier than any words could have been. Dad, Emily said, stepping closer, her voice trembling. What did you do? Before Harold could answer, the machine beside his bed let out a sharp, urgent beep. His eyes widened in pain, his hand clutching his chest. Nurse! Emily screamed, rushing toward the door. Somebody help him! As doctors rushed into the room and pushed her aside. Emily stood frozen, staring at her father's pale face, realizing with horror that the truth she had waited 25 years to hear might die with him before she ever learned what he was truly hiding. The hospital hallway was cold and silent, except for the quiet beeping of machines behind closed doors. Emily sat on a hard plastic chair outside her father's room, her hands pressed against her face. The doctors had stabilized him, but he was still unconscious. Whatever secret he was about to reveal was now locked inside a mind that might never wake up fully again. She stared at the small metal box the nurse had placed in her lap before letting her wait outside. Harold had been reaching for it when his heart gave out. Emily's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were old documents, yellowed with age, bank papers, property deeds, and a folded letter with a name on it that made Emily's blood run cold. She didn't have time to read further. A nurse called her back inside. Her father was stable for now, but the truth would have to wait. Across town, in the quiet house on Maple Street, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Robert had gone to bed early, but Margaret couldn't sleep. She hadn't been able to sleep properly in 25 years. Every year, on James's birthday, the guilt grew heavier. She loved James with all her heart, more than she ever thought possible. But every time she looked at him, she also saw Emily's eyes staring back at her. The same shape, the same sadness hidden behind a smile. Margaret had wanted to say no all those years ago. She had wanted to fight her husband's decision. But Harold had convinced Robert, and Robert had convinced her. It's the only way to keep the family whole, they said. Emily is young. She can start over. The baby will have a good home. It's better this way, she had told herself that lie so many times that some nights she almost believed it. But tonight, something felt different. James had asked her a question after the party that she couldn't stop thinking about. Mom, why don't we have any hospital pictures of me? She had lied again, the way she always did. We lost them in a move, sweetheart. But the look on his face told her he wasn't fully convinced. Margaret closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She thought of Emily, watching from outside the house every year, never stepping in. She thought of James, living a life built on a foundation of secrets. And she thought of Harold, lying in a hospital bed, perhaps taking the full truth to his grave. Maybe it's time, she thought. Maybe it's finally time to stop hiding. Upstairs, James couldn't sleep either. He sat on his bedroom floor, the old shoebox open in front of him. He picked up the strange baby photo again, studying the tiny hospital band on the infant's wrist. He grabbed his phone and zoomed into the picture, trying to read the blurry letters. After a few tries, he finally made out part of the name. It didn't say James Wilson. It looked like it started with an E. His heart pounded. He searched through the rest of the box, digging past old toys and baby clothes, until his fingers touched something stiff at the bottom, an envelope. Yellowed and sealed, tucked beneath a folded blanket. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter, written in careful, loving handwriting. My sweet baby boy, I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't even know if I will ever be brave enough to give it to you. But I need you to know that giving you up was never my choice. I was forced. I want you to know that not one single day has passed where I haven't thought of you, prayed for you, and loved you from a distance. I hope, wherever you are, that you are happy. I hope one day you will understand and forgive me. Love always, your mother. James stared at the letter, his chest tightening painfully. His hands trembled so hard the paper shook. Your mother, not Margaret, just mother. Someone else's words, someone else's grief. He sat frozen for a long moment, his mind racing, refusing to accept what his heart already understood. If Margaret isn't the one who wrote this, then who is my real mother? He thought about the photograph again, the hospital band with a name that wasn't his. He thought about the missing baby pictures, the strange looks his parents gave him, the chill he felt earlier that night, as if someone had been watching him. He needed answers, real answers, not comforting lies. Quietly, James got up and walked to his parents' bedroom door. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if this was some misunderstanding? But deep down, he already knew the truth was far bigger than a misunderstanding. He lowered his hand and stepped back. Confronting them now wouldn't get him the truth, not after 25 years of careful lies. If his family had hidden something this big for this long, they wouldn't simply admit it because he asked that. He needed proof. Real proof. James walked back to his room, tucked the letter safely into his jacket pocket, and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as a plan began forming in his mind. Birth records, hospital archives, adoption agencies. He typed the first search. How to find your birth records. As the search results loaded, James took a deep breath, unaware that just a few miles away, in a hospital bed, the man who held the darkest pieces of his story was fighting for his life, and that the woman who loved him more than anyone, the one who wrote that letter, was about to face the biggest decision of her life behind him. Unseen in the darkness of the hallway, Margaret stood frozen outside his door, her hand pressed against her mouth, having just witnessed her son quietly searching for the truth she had spent 25 years trying to protect him from. Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure James would hear it through the door. She had seen everything, the letter in his hand, the shock on his face, the determination in his eyes as he opened his laptop. She wanted to walk in. She wanted to sit beside him and finally tell him everything. But fear held her in place, the same fear that had silenced her for 25 years. Instead, she quietly stepped back and returned to her room, her mind spinning. Robert was asleep, unaware of the storm that had just begun in their home. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. She thought about Emily, alone somewhere, still carrying a burden no mother should carry. She thought about Harold in his hospital bed, holding secrets that could destroy them all, or finally set them free. For the first time in 25 years, Margaret felt something stronger than fear. She felt ready. The next morning, James drove to the county records office before work, his hands still trembling slightly from the night before. He requested a copy of his original birth certificate using his full legal name and date of birth. The clerk returned a few minutes later, frowning slightly. "This is strange," she said. "Your file shows an amended certificate. The original was sealed under court order 25 years ago, sealed." James asked, his throat tight. "Why would it be sealed?" "That usually happens in closed adoptions," the clerk explained gently. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't release sealed records without a court petition or written consent from the biological parent." James left the building in a daze. Adoption. The word echoed in his mind like a slow, painful drumbeat. Everything he thought he knew about his life had just cracked open. He wasn't ready to confront his parents yet. Not until he understood everything. So he did the only other thing he could think of. He called the number on an old business card he found tucked inside the envelope with his mother's letter. A lawyer's name was printed on it, Charles Bennett, Family Law. To his surprise, the number still worked. An elderly man's voice answered. "Bennett Law Office. I found this number in some old adoption papers," James said carefully. I think you may have handled my case 25 years ago." There was a long pause on the other end. "What's your name, son?" "James Wilson." "But I don't think that was my name at birth." Another pause, longer this time. "I think you'd better come in," the old lawyer said quietly. "Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again." Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat beside her father's hospital bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. The doctors said he was stable, but weak. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words that made no sense except for one name he repeated over and over. Daniel ... Daniel ... Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't know anyone named Daniel. But something about the way her father said the name, filled with fear and regret, told her it mattered. She opened the metal box again, this time reading through the documents more carefully. Bank statements, property transfers, and finally, the folded letter she hadn't had time to read before. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. It was a letter from a man named Daniel Hayes, dated almost 26 years ago, a letter to Harold, warning him to stay away from what wasn't his to take and demanding money in exchange for silence about a business deal gone wrong. Emily's breath caught. Daniel Hayes. That name sounded familiar, painfully familiar. It took her a moment to remember why. Daniel Hayes was the young man she had loved 26 years ago. The same young man her father claimed had run away the moment he learned she was pregnant. But according to this letter, Daniel hadn't run away at all. Emily's mind raced, connecting pieces that had never fit together before. Her father hadn't just orchestrated the adoption to hide her pregnancy. He had also gotten rid of Daniel, the real father of her child, because of some hidden business conflict between them. She thought of the strange business dealings her father always avoided discussing. She thought of the sudden wealth increase around the time she was pregnant. And she thought of Daniel, who had promised to marry her and who had simply vanished without a word. He didn't leave me, Emily realized, her hands trembling. My father made sure he could never come back. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was Margaret. Emily, Margaret said, her voice shaking. We need to talk. It's about James. He's starting to find out the truth on his own. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything crashing down at once. I know, she whispered. I think it's time we stopped hiding, Mom, all of it. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Margaret said something Emily never expected to hear. I found some of your father's old files years ago, Margaret admitted quietly. Hidden ones. I never told anyone because I was afraid of what they meant. But if James is looking for the truth, maybe it's time we gave it to him. All of it, the adoption, the money, and whatever your father did to that boy's real father. Emily felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. Can you get those files without Dad knowing? I already have them, Margaret said. I've kept them safe for years, just in case. Before Emily could respond, a loud, weak voice suddenly interrupted from the hospital bed behind her. Emily. Harold whispered, his eyes barely open, but full of fear. What are you doing? Put that box down. Emily turned slowly, holding the letter tightly in her hand. Tell me the truth, Dad. What did you do to Daniel? Harold's eyes widened in panic. With surprising strength for a dying man, he reached for the call button beside his bed and pressed it hard. Nurse, he shouted hoarsely. Get her out of here. She's not allowed near my things. Emily stared at her father in disbelief as hospital staff rushed in, gently pulling her away from the bed. As she was escorted into the hallway, Harold's frightened eyes locked onto hers one last time. You don't understand, he gasped. If the truth comes out, it won't just destroy me. It will destroy everything you and James have left. The doors closed between them, leaving Emily standing alone in the hallway, clutching the letter that held the key to a secret far darker than she had ever imagined. A secret that, once revealed, could tear the entire family apart forever. James sat across from Charles Bennett in a small, dusty law office filled with old file cabinets. The elderly lawyer studied him for a long moment before speaking. 25 years ago, I handled a private adoption, Bennett said slowly. A young woman named Emily Miller signed away her son. Her parents arranged for the child to be raised by close family under strict secrecy. I always thought it was unusual, but the father insisted and paid well to keep everything quiet. James's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Close family? You mean? My adoptive parents already knew my birth mother? Bennett nodded slowly. The couple who adopted you were the birth mother's own parents' choice, her sister and brother-in-law. Robert and Margaret Wilson. The room seemed to spin around James. Margaret is. My grandmother? Yes, Bennett said quietly. And Emily Miller is your biological mother. James sat in stunned silence. Memories flooding back, the woman's shadow outside his birthday party. The letter signed simply your mother, the sadness he always saw in Margaret's eyes. Every strange piece of his life suddenly fit together, forming a picture far more painful than he ever imagined. There's something else, Bennett added carefully. The birth father wasn't just some boy who ran away. Harold Miller, Emily's father, threatened him, paid him off, made him disappear, using pressure from a business dispute. I only learned this recently when Harold reached out to me last month asking me to destroy the original adoption file completely. James's jaw tightened. Why would he want to destroy it now? Because he's dying, Bennett said. And guilty men often try to erase their sins before facing judgment. That evening, Margaret called James and Emily to the house on Maple Street. Robert sat quietly in the corner, his face pale, finally aware that the secret he'd helped keep for 25 years was about to unravel completely. James walked through the door first, his eyes locking onto Margaret with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Moments later, Emily stepped inside, her hands trembling as she saw her son standing in the home she had watched from a distance for so many years. The room fell into heavy silence. I think it's time, Margaret said softly, tears already forming in her eyes, that we stop hiding from the truth. James turned toward Emily, his voice shaking with emotion. Are you really my mother? Emily's tears fell freely now. Yes, she whispered. I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted to give you up. I was forced. I've watched you grow up from a distance every single day, wishing I could hold you, wishing I could tell you the truth. James felt anger and heartbreak crashing together inside him. 25 years, he said, his voice breaking. 25 years of lies. Everyone in this house knew who I really was, except me. We were trying to protect you, Robert said quietly from the corner. Protect me. James snapped, his voice louder now. Or protect yourselves? Before anyone could answer, Margaret placed a folder on the table, the hidden files she had kept secret for years. There's more you both need to know, she said. About Harold and about James's real father. Emily's eyes widened. The letter. About Daniel. Margaret nodded gravely. Harold didn't just force you to give up your baby to protect the family's name. He used the adoption to cover up something far worse. Daniel Hayes discovered that Harold had been stealing money from a shared business investment. When Daniel threatened to expose him, Harold used his connections to ruin Daniel's reputation and forced him to disappear, paying him to stay silent and never return. Emily's hands covered her mouth in shock. He didn't abandon me. My father destroyed his life to protect his own crimes. James's chest tightened with fury. So my whole life was built on lies, just so Harold could protect his money and his image. Just then, Margaret's phone rang. It was the hospital. Her face went pale as she listened. Harold is awake, she said, hanging up the phone. And he's asking for all of us. He says he wants to confess everything before it's too late. At the hospital, the family gathered around Harold's bed. His face was thin and pale, his breathing slow, but his eyes were sharp, filled with something between fear and desperation. I don't have much time, Harold said weakly. So I need to say this now. Emily stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger and grief. Then tell the truth, Dad. All of it. Harold's eyes shifted to James, studying him carefully. You look just like him, he murmured. Just like Daniel. James clenched his fists. Where is he? What did you do to him? Harold closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the last of his strength. I ruined him financially. I made sure no one would believe him if he spoke against me. I paid him to leave and never come back, and told Emily he abandoned her. The room fell into stunned silence. But that's not all, Harold continued, his voice growing weaker. The inheritance, the property, the money I built over the years. None of it was mine to begin with. Daniel and I were partners. Everything I own rightfully belongs to him and his son. James's breath caught in his throat. Harold nodded slowly. There's a document hidden in my house that proves everything. If it's found, it will change everything legally and financially. Suddenly, the heart monitor beside Harold's bed began beeping rapidly. His eyes widened in pain as his body tensed. Where is the document? Emily asked urgently, grabbing his hand. Dad, tell us where it is. Harold's lips moved, struggling to form words. His eyes locked onto James with something that almost looked like regret. It's hidden in. The monitor let out a sharp, continuous alarm. Doctors rushed into the room, pushing the family aside as they worked frantically to save him. Emily screamed his name, tears streaming down her face, while James stood frozen, staring at the man who held the final piece of truth, a truth that had died on his lips, leaving them all standing on the edge of a revelation that could change their lives forever. The hospital room grew quiet except for the steady beep of machines. Harold had slipped back into unconsciousness, his secret still unfinished, hanging in the air like a question no one could answer. Emily sat beside the bed, exhausted, her hands still resting on her father's. James stood near the window, staring out at the dark parking lot, his mind spinning with everything he had just learned. Margaret and Robert stood quietly together, their guilt heavy on their shoulders. We have to find that document, Emily said finally, breaking the silence. Whatever it is, it's the only proof we have of what really happened to Daniel. James turned around, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. He said it was hidden in his house. We need to search it before anyone else does. Robert stepped forward for the first time that night. I know Harold better than anyone. If he hid something important, it won't be somewhere obvious. It'll be somewhere only family would think to look. Only the next morning, James, Emily, and Margaret arrived at Harold's large, quiet house. It felt cold and lifeless without him in it, filled with expensive furniture that now seemed to represent nothing but stolen success. They searched for hours, going through drawers, cabinets, and old boxes. Just as they were about to give up, James noticed something strange about an old family portrait hanging in Harold's study. It hung slightly crooked, as if it had been moved recently. He lifted the frame carefully, revealing a small hidden safe built into the wall behind it. Margaret, James said, his voice tight with anticipation. Do you know the code? Margaret thought for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. Try Emily's birthday, she whispered. It's the one date Harold could never forget. No matter how hard he tried, James entered the numbers with trembling hands. The lock clicked open. Inside was a thick folder, along with old photographs and a signed legal document. James pulled it out carefully and began to read. It was a partnership agreement between Harold Miller and Daniel Hayes, dated 26 years ago, proving the two men had built the family's fortune together. Behind it was a second document, a threat letter Harold had written to Daniel, along with a bank transfer receipt showing a large payment made to ensure his silence and permanent departure. Emily's hands shook as she read the papers. This proves everything, she said. Daniel didn't abandon us. My father erased him from our lives to steal his share of everything they built together. James felt a strange mixture of anger and relief wash over him. For the first time, he wasn't just discovering painful truths. He was holding real proof that could finally set things right. 2 weeks later, Harold passed away quietly in his sleep, never waking again after that hospital confession. But before he died, the family had already contacted a lawyer, the same Charles Bennett who had handled the original adoption, to help make things right. At the reading of Harold's will, distant relatives gathered, expecting to hear how his fortune would be divided among them. Instead, Bennett stood before them, holding the documents James had found. Before we proceed, Bennett announced, "There is a legal matter that must be addressed. This estate, and much of its wealth, was built through a partnership with a man named Daniel Hayes, who was wrongfully forced out of the business through threats and financial manipulation." Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Under the law, Bennett continued, a portion of this estate rightfully belongs to Daniel Hayes, and in his absence, to his biological son, James Wilson. The room fell into stunned silence. Relatives who had spent years flattering Harold for a share of his fortune now stared in shock as the truth unraveled before them, stripping away the false reputation Harold had spent his whole life protecting. James felt no joy in the moment. This wasn't about money. It was about the truth finally being spoken out loud. With the legal matter set into motion, the family worked together to track down Daniel Hayes. After weeks of searching, they found him living a quiet, humble life in a small coastal town, having rebuilt his life far from the pain Harold had caused him. When James finally met him for the first time, standing outside a small, modest home by the sea, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Daniel studied James's face carefully, tears filling his eyes. "You have her smile," Daniel said softly. Emily's smile. James felt a lump rise in his throat. "I found out everything," he said. "What my grandfather did to you." "I'm sorry it took 25 years. Daniel placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "It's not too late," he said. "Some things are worth waiting for, even if it takes a lifetime." In the months that followed, the family slowly began to heal. James built a relationship with both Daniel and Emily, learning to understand the pain and sacrifice hidden behind the lies of his childhood. Margaret and Robert, though still carrying guilt, were forgiven in time, understanding that love, even when built on secrets, was still love. The stolen fortune was rightfully returned, but more importantly, the truth was finally free. Harold's carefully built reputation crumbled, remembered not for the success he built, but for the family he broke apart to protect it. On a quiet evening, months later, James stood on the porch of Daniel's home watching the sunset over the ocean with his mother beside him. 25 years of silence, Emily said softly, and yet, somehow, we found our way back to each other. James smiled gently, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Some secrets take a lifetime to break," he said, "but love always finds a way to survive them." For the first time in 25 years, Emily felt truly at peace, no longer a mother hidden in the shadows, but standing proudly beside the son she had never stopped loving. And as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, the family that had once been built on lies finally began to heal, stronger and more honest than ever before. The end.